Alex Rider. Chapter 4. So, what do you say? That's the name of the chapter, not me. Alex opened his eyes. So, he was still alive. That was a nice surprise. Just after getting shot by a big gun. That was a very nice surprise. He was lying on a bed in a large, comfortable room. The bed was modern, but the room was old, with beams running across the ceiling, a stone fireplace, and narrow windows in ornate wooden frame. He had seen rooms like this in books when he was studying Shakespeare. He would have said the building was Elizabethan. It had to be somewhere in the country. There was no sound of traffic outside. He could see trees. Someone had undressed him. His school uniform was gone. Instead, he was wearing loose pajamas. Silk from the feel of them. From the light outside, he would have guessed it was early evening. He found his watch lying on the table beside the bed, and he reached out for it. The time was 12 o'clock. It had been half past 4 when he was shot with what must have been a drugged dart. He had lost the whole night and half a day. There was a bathroom leading off the bedroom, bright white tiles, and a huge shower behind a cylinder of glass and chrome. Alex stripped off the pajamas and stood for 5 minutes under a jet of steaming water. He felt better after that. He went back into the bedroom and opened the cupboard. Someone had been to his house in Chelsea. All his clothes were here, neatly hung up. He wondered what Crawley had told Jack. Presumably he would have made up some story to explain his sudden disappearance. He took out a pair of Gap combat trousers, a Nike sweatshirt and trainers, got dressed, then sat on the bed and waited. About 15 minutes later, there was a knock on the door, and the door opened. A young Asian woman in a nurse's uniform came in, beaming. "Oh, you're awake and dressed. How are you feeling? Not too groggy, I hope. Please come this way. Mr. Blunt is expecting you for lunch." Alex hadn't spoken a word to her. Alex hadn't spoken a word to her. He followed her out of the room, along a corridor, and down a flight of stairs. The house was indeed Elizabethan, with wooden panels along the corridors, ornate chandeliers, and oil paintings of old bearded men in tunics and ruffs. The stairs led down into a hall galleried room with a rug spread out over flagstones, and a fireplace big enough to park a car in. A long polished wooden table had been laid for 3. Alan Blunt and a dark, rather masculine woman unwrapping a sweet, already sitting down. "Miss Blunt?" "Alex." Blunt smiled briefly, as if it was something he didn't enjoy doing. "It's good of you to join us." Alex sat down. You didn't give me a lot of a choice." "Yes, I don't know what Crawley was thinking of shooting you like that, but I suppose it was the easiest way. May I introduce you to my colleague, Miss Jones?" The woman nodded at Alex. Her eyes seemed to examine him minutely, but she said nothing. "Who are you?" Alex asked. "What do you want with me?" I'm sure you have a great many questions. But first, let's eat. Blunt must have pressed a hidden button or else he was being overheard, for at the precise moment a door opened and a waiter in white jacket and black trousers appeared, carrying 3 plates. I hope you eat meat, Blunt continued. Today is Caradagnio. You mean roast and lamb? The chef is French. Alex waited until the food had been served. Blunt and Miss Jones drank red wine. He stuck to water. Finally, Blunt began. As I'm sure you've gathered, he said, the Royal and General is not a bank. In fact, it doesn't exist. It's nothing more than a cover, and it follows, of course, that your uncle had nothing to do with banking. He worked for me. My name, as I told you at the funeral, is Blunt. I am Chief Executive of the Special Operations Division of MI6. And your uncle was, for want of a better word, a spy. Alex couldn't help smiling. You mean like James Bond? Similar, although we don't go in for numbers, 00, and all the rest of it. He was a field agent, highly trained and very courageous. He successfully completed assignments in Ireland, Washington, Hong Kong, and Cairo, to name but a few. I imagine this must come as a bit of a shock to you. Alex thought about the dead man, what he had known of his privacy, his long absence abroad, and the times he had come home injured. A bandaged arm one time, a bruised face another. Little accident, Alex had been told, but now it all made sense. I'm not shocked, he said. Blunt cut a neat slice of meat. Iron Rider's luck ran out on his last mission. He went on. He'd been working undercover here in England, in Cornwall, and was driving back to London to make a report when he was killed. He saw his car at the yard. Stryker and Son. Alex muttered. Who are they? Just people we use. We have budget restraints. We have to contract some of our work out. Miss Jones here is our head of special operations. She gave your uncle his last assignment. We're very sorry to have lost him, Alex. The woman spoke for the first time. She didn't sound very sorry at all. Do you know who killed him? Yes. Are you going to tell me? No, not now. Why not? Because you don't need to know. Not at this stage. All right. Alex put down his knife and fork. He hadn't actually eaten anything. My uncle was a spy. Thanks to you, he's dead. I found out too much, so you knocked me out and brought me here. Where am I, by the way? This is one of our training centres, Miss Jones said. You brought me here because you don't want me to tell you anyone what I know. Is that what this is all about? Because if it is, I'll sign the official Secrets Act, or whatever it is you want me to do. Then I'd like to go home. This is all crazy anyway, and I've had enough. I'm out of here. Blunt coughed quietly. It's not quite easy as that. It's not quite as easy as that, he said. Why not? It's certainly true that you did draw attention to yourself, both at the breakers' yards and then at our offices on Liverpool Street. And it's also true what you know. And what I'm about to tell you must go no further. The fact of the matter is, Alex, we need your help. My help? He paused. Have you heard of a man called Horowitz Sailor? Have you heard of a word called Horowitz Sailor? Alex thought for a moment. I've seen his name in the newspaper. He's something to do with computers and his own racehorses. Doesn't he come from somewhere in Egypt? No, from Lebanon. Blunt took a sip of wine. Let me tell you his story, Alex. I'm sure you'll find it of interest. Horowitz Sailor was born in complete poverty in the back streets of Beirut. His father was a failed hairdresser. His mother took in the washing. He had 9 brothers and 4 sisters, all living together in 3 small rooms, along with the family goat. Young Herod never went to school and should have ended up unemployed, unable to read or write, like the rest of his family. But when he was 7, something occurred that changed his life. He was walking down Olive Street in the middle of Beirut. When he happened to see an upright piano fall out of a 14th-story window. Apparently it was being moved, and it somehow overtuned. Anyway, there were a couple of American tourists walking along the pavement below, and they would both have been crushed. No doubt about it. Except that at the last minute, Herod threw himself at them and pushed them out of the way. The piano missed them by a millimeter. Of course, they were enormously grateful to the young waif, and it turned out they were very rich. They made enquiries about him and discovered how poor he was. The very clothes he was wearing had been passed down by all 9 of his brothers. And so, out of gratitude, they more or less adopted him, flew him out of Beirut, and put him into a school over here, where he made astonishing progress. He got 9 O-levels, and he's an amazing coincidence. Here is an amazing coincidence. At the age of 15, he actually found himself sitting next to a boy who would grow up to become the Prime Minister of Great Britain. Our present Prime Minister, in fact, the 2 of them work at school together. I'll move quickly forward. After school, Sailor went to Cambridge. When he got a first in economics, he then set out on a career that went from success to success. His own radio station, record label, computer software, and yes, he even found time to buy a string of racehorses. Although for some reason they always seemed to come last. But what drew him to our attention was his most recent invention, a quite revolutionary computer which he calls the Stormbreaker. Stormbreaker. Alex remembered the file he had found in Iron Rider's office. Things were beginning to come together. The Stormbreaker is manufactured by Sale Enterprises. Miss Jones said, there's been a lot of talk about the design. It has a black keyboard and black casing with a lightning bolt going down the side. I said he had seen a picture of it online. It doesn't only look different, Blunt cut in. It's based on a completely new technology. It uses something called the round processor. I don't suppose that'll mean anything to you. It's an integrated circuit on a sphere of silicon about 1 millimeter in diameter, Alex said. It's 90% cheaper to produce that than an ordinary chip, because the whole thing is sealed, so you don't need clean rooms for production. Oh yes, Blunt coughed. Well, the point is, later today, Sale Enterprises are going to make quite a remarkable announcement. They are planning to give away tens of thousands of these computers. In fact, it is their intention to ensure that every secondary school in Britain gets its own Stormbreaker. It's an unparalleled act of generosity. Sale's way of thanking the country that gave him a home. So, the man's a hero. So it would seem he wrote to Downing Street a few months ago. My dear Prime Minister, you may remember me from our school days. Together for almost 40 years, I have lived in England, and I wish to make a gesture, something will never be forgotten, to express my true feelings towards your country. The letter went on to describe the gift and was signed, yours humbly, by the man himself. Of course, the whole government was a cock up. The computers are being assembled at the Sale plant down in Port Talon, Cornwall. They'll be shipped across the country. They'll be shipped across the country, guys. Can you believe it? They'll be shipped across the country. But it is a very, very famous place, so of course it will be. They'll be shipped across the country at the end of this month. And on April 1st, there's to be a special ceremony at the Science Museum in London. The Prime Minister is going to press the button. They'll bring all the computers online. The whole lot of them. And this is top secret, by the way. Mr. Sale is to be rewarded with British citizenship, which is apparently something he has always wanted. Well, I'm very happy for him, Alex said. But you still haven't told me what this has got to do with me. Blunt glared at Miss Jones, who had finished her meal while he was talking. He unwrapped another peppermint and took over. For some time now, our department, Special Operations, had been concerned about Mr. Sale. The fact of the matter is, we've been wondering if he isn't too good to be true. I won't go into all the details, Alex, but we've been looking at his business dealings. He has contacts in China and the former Soviet Union countries that have never been our friends. The government may think he's a saint. But there's a ruthless side to him too. And the security arrangements down at Port Talon worry us a lot. He's more or less got his own private army. He's acting as if he's got something to hide. Not that anyone will listen, Blunt muttered. Exactly, the government's too keen to get their hands on these computers to listen to us. That was why we decided to send our own man down to the plant supposedly to check on security, but in fact his job was to keep an eye on Horowitz' sale. "You're talking about my uncle," Alex said. Iron Rider had told him that he was going to an insurance convention. Another lie in a life that had been nothing but lies. Yes, he was there for 3 weeks. Unlike us, he didn't exactly take to Mr. Salem. In his first report, he described him as short-tempered and unpleasant, but at the same time, he had to admit that everything seemed to be fine. Production was on schedule, the storm breakers were coming off the line, and everyone seemed to be happy. Then we got a message. Ryder couldn't say very much because it was an open line, but he told us that something had happened. He said he discovered something, that the storm breakers mustn't leave the plant, and that he was coming up to London at once. He left Port Talon at 4 o'clock. He never even got to the motorway. He was ambushed in a quiet country lane. The local police found the car. We arranged for it to be brought up here. Alex sat in silence. He could imagine it. A twisting lane with trees just in blossom. The silver BMW gleaming as it raced past and round a corner. A second car waiting. "Why are you telling me all this?" he said. "It proves what we're saying." "It proves what we are saying, Alex." Blunt replied. We have our doubts about Sale, so we send a man down, our best man. He finds out something and he ends up dead. Maybe Ryder discovered the truth. But I don't understand. Sale is giving away the computers. He's not making any money out of them. In turn, he's getting British citizenship. Fine, what's he got to hide? We don't know, Blunt said. We just don't know. We want to find out, and soon, before these computers leave the plant. They're being shipped out on 31st March. Miss Jones added, only about 2 weeks from now. He glanced at Blunt. He nodded. That's why it's essential for us to send someone else to Port Talon. Someone to continue where your uncle left off. Alex smiled queasily. I hope you're not looking at me. You can't just send in another agent, Miss Jones said. The enemy has shown his hand. He's killed Ryder. He's expecting a replacement. Somehow we have to trick him. We have to send in someone who won't be noticed, Blunt continued. Someone who can look around and report back without being seen themselves. You considering sending down a woman? She might be able to slip in as a secretary of receptionists. But then I had a better idea. A few months ago, one of these computer magazines ran a competition. Be the first boy or girl to use the Stormbreaker, travel to Port Talon and meet Horowitz Sale himself. That was the first prize, and was won by some young chap who's apparently a bit of a whiz kid when it comes to computers. Name of Felix Lester, 14 years old, the same age as you. He looks a bit like you too. He's expected down at Port Talon less than 2 weeks from now. Wait a minute. You've already shown yourself to be an extraordinary brave and resourceful, Blunt said. First of all, at the breaker's yard, that was a karate kick, wasn't it? How long have you been learning karate? Alex didn't answer, so he went on. And then there was a little test where I arranged you at the bank, and any boy who could climb out of a 15th floor window just to satisfy his own curiosity had to be rather special. And it seems to me that you are very special indeed. What we're suggesting is that you come and work for us. Miss Jones said. We have enough time to give you some basic training. Not that you'll need it, probably. And we can equip you with a few items that may help you with the watch we have in mind. Then we'll arrange for you to take the place of this other boy. You go to sail Enterprises on 29th March. That's when this Lester boy is expected. You'll stay until 1st of April, which is the day of the ceremony. The timing couldn't be better. You'll be able to meet Herod Sail, keep an eye on him, and tell us what you think. Perhaps you'll find out what it was that your uncle discovered and why he had to die. You shouldn't be in any danger. After all, who would suspect a 14-year-old boy of being a spy? All we're asking you to do is report back to us, Blunt said. That's all we want. 2 weeks of your time to a chance to make sure these computers are everything they're cracked up to be. A chance to serve your country. Blunt had finished his dinner. His plate was completely clean, as if there hadn't been any food on it at all. He put down his knife and fork, laying them precisely side by side. All right, Alex, he said. So what do you say? There was a long pause. Blunt was watching him with polite interest. Miss Jones was unwrapping yet another peppermint, her black eyes seemingly fixed on the twist of paper in her hands. No, Alex said. I'm sorry. It's a dumb idea. I don't want to be a spy. I want to be a footballer. Anyway, I have a life of my own. He found it difficult to choose the right words. The whole thing was so preposterous. He almost wanted to laugh. Why don't you ask this Felix Lester to snoop around for you? We don't believe he'd be as resourceful as you, Blunt said. He's probably better at computer games. Alex shook his head. I'm sorry, I'm just not interested. I don't want to get involved. That's a pity, Blunt said. His tone of voice hadn't changed, but there was a heavy, dead quality to the words. There was something different, too, about him. Throughout the meal, he had been polite, not friendly, but at least human in an instant that had disappeared. Alex thought of a toilet chain being pulled. The human part of him had just been flushed away. Then we'd better move on to discuss your future, he continued. Like it or not, Alex, the Royal and General is now your legal guardian. I thought you said the Royal and General didn't exist. Blunt ignored him. Iron Rider has, of course, left the house and all of his money to you. However, he left it in trust until you are 21, and we control that trust. So there will, I'm afraid, have to be some changes. The American girl who lives with you, Jack, Miss Starbright, her visa has expired. She'll be returning to America. We propose to put the house on the market. Unfortunately, you have no relatives to look after you, so I'm afraid that also means you'll have to leave Brookland. You'll also be sent to an institution. There's one I know just outside Birmingham, the St. Elizabeth in Sowerbridge. Not a very pleasant place, but I'm afraid there's no alternative. You're blackmailing me? Alex exclaimed. Not at all. But if I agree to do what you ask, Blunt glanced at Miss Jones. Help us, and we'll help you, she said. Alex considered, but not for very long. He had no choice, and he knew it. Not when these people control his money, his present life, his entire future. You talked about training, he said. Miss Jones nodded. That's why we brought you here, Alex. This is a training centre. If you agree to what we want, we can start at once. Start at once. Alex spoke 3 words without liking the sound of them. Blunt and Miss Jones were waiting for his answer. He said, Yeah, it doesn't look like I've got very... Yeah, all right. It doesn't look like I've got very much of much choice. He lost the slices of cold lamb on his plate. Dead meat. Suddenly, he knew how it felt. Chapter 5. Double or Nothing. For the 100th time, Alex cursed Alan Blunt, using his language he hadn't even realised he knew. It was almost 5 o'clock in the evening, although it could have been 5 o'clock in the morning. The sky had barely changed at all throughout the day. It was grey, cold, and forgiving. The rain was still falling, a thin drizzle that travelled horizontally in the wind, soaking through his supposedly waterproof clothing mixed with sweat and his dirt, chilling him to the bone. He unfolded his map and checked his position once again. He had to be close to the last RV of the day. The last rendezvous point, but he could see nothing. He was standing on a narrow track made up of loose grey shingle that crunched under his combat boots when he walked. The track snaked round the side of a mountain with a sheer drop to the right. He was somewhere in the Brecon Beacons, and there should have been a view, but it had been wiped out by the rain and the fading light. A few trees twisted out of the side of the hill, with leaves as hard as thorns. Behind him, below him, ahead of him. It was all the same, nowhere land. Alex hurt. The 10-kilogram Bergen rucksack had been forced to wear cut in his shoulders, and had rubbed blisters on his back. His right knee on his back. His right knee, where he had fallen earlier in the day, was no longer bleeding, but still stung. His shoulder, the bruises, and there was a gash along the side of his neck. His camouflage outfit, he had swapped his Gap combat trousers for the real thing. Fitted him badly, cutting his legs and under his arms, but hanging loose everywhere else. He was close to exhaustion. He knew, almost too tired to feel how much pain he was in. But for the glucose and caffeine tablets in the survival pack, he would have ground to a halt hours ago. He knew that if he didn't find the RV soon, he would physically unable to continue. Then he would be thrown off the course, binned as they call it. They would like that, swallowing down the taste of defeat. Alex folded the map and forced himself on. It was his ninth, or maybe 10th day of training. Time had begun to dissolve it into itself, as shapeless as the rain. After his lunch with Alan Blunt and Miss Jones, he had been moved out of the manor house and into a crude wooden hut in the training camp. A few miles away, there were 9 huts in total, each equipped with 4 metal beds and 4 metal lockers. A 5th had been squeezed into one of them to accommodate Alex. 2 more huts painted a different colour stood side by side. One of these was a kitchen and mess hall. The other contained toilets, sinks, and showers with not a single hot tap in sight. On his first day there, Alex had been introduced to his training officer, an incredibly fit black sergeant. He was the sort of man who thought he'd seen everything until he saw Alex. He had examined the new arrival for a long minute before he had spoken. "It's not my job to ask questions," he had said. "But if it was, I want to know what they're thinking of. Sending me children. Do you have any idea where you are, boy? This isn't Center Parks. This isn't the Club Mediterranean." He cut the word into its 5 syllables and spat them out. "I have you for 11 days. they expect me to give you the sort of training that should take 14 weeks. That's not just mad, that's suicidal. I didn't ask to be here, Alex had said. Suddenly, the sergeant was furious. You don't speak to me unless I give you permission, he shouted. And when you speak to me, you address me as sir. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Alex had already decided that the man was even worse than his geography teacher. There are 5 units operational here at the moment, the officer went on. You'll join K unit. We don't use names. I have no name. You have no name. If anyone asks you what you're doing, you tell them nothing. Some of the men may be high on you. Some of them may resent you to being here. That's too bad. You'll just have to live with it. And I can make allowances for you. You're a boy, not a man. But if you complain, you'll be binned. If you cry, you'll be binned. If you can't keep up, you'll be binned. Between you and me, boy, this is a mistake. And I want to bin you. After that, Alex joined the K unit. As the sergeant had predicted, they weren't exactly overjoyed to see him. There were 4 of them, as Alex was soon to discover. The Special Operations Division of MI6 sent its agents to the same training centre used by the Special Air Service, the SAS. Much of the training was based on SAS methods, and this included the numbers and makeup of each team. So there were 4 men, each with their own special skills, and one boy seemingly with none. They were all in their mid-20s, spread out over the bunks. Companionable silence. 2 of them smoking, one dismantling and reassembling his gun, a 9mm Browning high-power pistol. Each of them had been given a code name: Wolf, Fox, Eagle, and Snake. From now on, Alex will be known as Cub. The leader Wolf was the one with the gun. He was short and muscular with square shoulders and black close-cropped hair. He had a handsome face made slightly uneven by his nose, which had been broken at some time in the past. He was the first to speak, putting the gun down, so he examined Alex with cold dark eyes. So who the hell do you think you are? He demanded. Cub, Alex replied. A bloody schoolboy. Wolf spoke with a strange, slightly Georgian accent. I don't believe it. Are you with Special Operations? I'm not allowed to tell you that. Alex went over to his bunk and sat down. The mattress felt as solid as the frame. Despite the cold, there was only one blanket. Wolf shook his head and smiled humorously. Look what they've sent us, he muttered. 007, 00 nothing more like. After that, the name stuck. 00 nothing was what they called him. In the days that followed, Alex shadowed the group. Not quite part of it, but never far away. Almost everything they did, he did. He learned map reading, radio communication, and first aid. He took part in an unarmed combat class and was knocked to the ground so often that it took all his nerve to persuade him to get up again. And there was the assault course. There was the assault course. 5 nightmare of nets and ladders, tunnels and walls that stretched for almost half a kilometre through and over the woodland bases. The huts. Alex thought of it as the adventure playground from hell. The first time he tried, he fell off a rope and into a pit that seemed to have been filled on purpose with freezing slime, half drowned and filthy. He had been sent back to the start by the sergeant. Alex thought he would never get to the end, but the second time he finished it in 25 minutes, which he cut to 17 minutes by the end of the week. Bruised and exhausted though he was quite quietly pleased with himself. Even Wolf only man aged Wolf only man, aged it in 12. Wolf remained actively hostile towards Alex. The other three men simply ignored him, but Wolf did everything he could to taunt or humiliate him. It was as if Alex had somehow insulted him by being placed in the group. Once crawling under the neck, Wolf lashed out with his foot, missing Alex's face by a centimetre. Of course, he would have said it was an accident if the boot had connected. Another time, he was more successful tripping Alex up in metal, sending him flying along with his tray, cutlery and steaming plate of stew. Every time he spoke to Alex, he used the same sneering tone of voice. "Good night, 009. Don't wet the bed." Alex bit his lip and said nothing, but he was glad when the 4 men were sent off for a day's jungle survival course. This wasn't part of his own training, even though Sergeant worked him twice as hard once they were gone. Once they were gone. He preferred to be on his own, but on the 8th day, Wolf did come close to finishing him altogether. It happened in the killing house. The killing house was a mock-up of an embassy who used to train the SAS in the art of hostage release. Alex had twice watched K-Unit go into the house. First time swinging down from the roof, and had followed their progress on CCTV. All 4 men were armed. Alex himself didn't take part because someone somewhere had decided he shouldn't carry a gun. Inside the killing house, mannequins had been arrayed as terrorists, and hostages smashing down the doors and using stun grenades to clear the rooms with deafening multiple blasts. Wolf, Fox, Eagle and Snake had successfully completed their mission both times. This time Alex had joined them. The killing houses had booby traps. They weren't told how. All 5 of them were unarmed. Their job was to simply get from one end of the house to the other without being killed. They almost made it in the first room. They almost made it. In the first room, made up to look like a huge dining room, they found the pressure pads under the carpet and the infrared beams across the doors. For Alex, it was an eerie experience, tiptoeing behind the other 4 men, watching as they dismantled the 2 devices, using cigarette smoke to expose the otherwise invisible beams. It was strange to be afraid of everything and yet see nothing. In the hallway, there was a motion detector which would have activated a machine gun. Alex assumed it was loaded with blanks behind a Japanese screen. The 3rd room was empty. The 4th was a living room with the exit, a set of French windows. On the other side, there was a tripwire barely thicker than human hair, running the entire width of the room, and the French windows were alarmed. While Snake dealt with the alarm, Fox and Eagle prepared to neutralize the tripwire, unclipping an electronic circuit board and a variety of tools from their belts. Wolf stopped them. "Leave it. We're out of here." At the same moment, Snake signaled. He had deactivated the alarm. The French windows were opened. Snake was the first out. Then Fox and Eagle. Alex would have been the last to leave the room, but just as he reached the exit, he found the Wolf blocking his way. "Tough luck, 009, Wolf said. His voice was soft, almost kind. The next thing Alex knew, the heel of Wolf's palm had rammed into his chest, pushing him back with astonishing force. Taken by surprise, he lost his balance and fell, remembering tripwire, and tried to twist his body to avoid it, but it was hopeless. His flailing left hand caught the wire. He actually felt it against his wrist. He hit the floor, pulling the wire with him, and then the HRT stun grenade had been used frequently by the SAS. It's a small device filled with a mixture of magnesium powder and mercury fulminate. When the tripwire activated the grenade, the mercury exploded at once, not just deafening Alex, but shuddering through him, as if it could rip out his heart. At the same time, the magnetism ignited and burned for a full 10 seconds. The light was so blinding that even closing his eyes made no difference. Alex lay there with his face against the hard wooden floor, his hands scrabbling against his head, unable to move, waiting for it to end. But even then, it wasn't over. When the magnetism finally burned out, it was as if all the light had burned out with it. Alex stumbled to his feet, unable to see or hear, not even sure any more where he was. He felt sick to his stomach. The room swayed around him. The heavy smell of chemicals hung in the air. 10 minutes later, he staggered out into the open. Wolf was waiting for him with the others. His face blank, and Alex realized he must have slipped out before he'd hit the ground. An angry sergeant walked over to him. Alex hadn't expected to see a shred of concern in the man's face, and he wasn't disappointed. "Do you want to tell me what happened in there, cub?" he demanded. When Alex didn't answer, he went on. "You ruined the exercise. You fouled up. You could get the whole unit binned. So you'd better start telling me what went wrong." Alex glanced at Wolf. Wolf looked the other way. What should he say? Should he even try to tell the truth? "Well," the sergeant was waiting. "Nothing happened, sir," Alex said. "I just wasn't looking where I was going. I stepped on something and there was an explosion." "If that was real life, you'd be dead," the sergeant said. "What did I tell you? Sending me a child was a mistake. And a stupid, clumsy child who doesn't even look where he's going. That's even worse." Alex stood where he was, just taking it. Out of the corner of his eyes, he could see Wolf half smiling. The sergeant had seen it too. You think it's so funny, Wolf? You can go clean up in there. And tonight you'd better get some rest, all of you, because tomorrow you've got a 40-kilometer hike. Survival rations, no fire. This is a survival course. And if you survive, then maybe you'll have a reason to smile. Alex remembered their words now. Exactly 24 hours later, he had spent the last 11 of them on his feet, following the trail the sergeant had sent out for him on the map. The exercise had begun at 6 o'clock in the morning after a grey-lit breakfast of sausages and beans. Wolf and the others had disappeared into the distance ahead of him a long time ago, even though they hadn't been given 25-kilogram rucksacks to carry. They had also been given only 8 hours to complete the course. Lambing for his age, Alex had been given 12. He rounded a corner, his feet scrunching on the gravel. There was someone standing ahead of him. It was the sergeant. He had just lit a cigarette, and Alex watched him slide the matches back into his pocket. Seeing him there brought back the shame and the anger of the day before, and at the same time sapped the last of his strength. Suddenly Alex had enough of Blunt, Miss Jones, Wolf, the whole stupid thing. With a final effort, he stumbled the last 100 meters and came to a halt. Rain and sweat trickled down the side of his face. His hair, now dark with grime, was glued across his forehead. Sergeant looked at his watch. 11 hours, 5 minutes. That's not bad, cub, but the others were here 3 hours ago. Bully for them, Alex thought. He didn't say anything. Anyway, you should just make it up to the last RV, the sergeant went on. It's up there. He pointed to a wall, not a sloping one, a sheer one. Solid rock rising 50 meters up without a handhold or a foothold in sight. Even looking at it, Alex felt his stomach shrink. Iron Rider had taken him climbing in Scotland, in France, and all over Europe, but he had never attempted this thing as difficult as this. Not on his own, not when he was so tired. "I can't," he said. In the end of the 2 words, it didn't came out easy. It didn't. In the end, the 2 words came out easily. I didn't hear that, the sergeant said. I said I can't do it, sir. Can't isn't a word we use around here. I don't care. I've had enough. I've just had... Alex's voice cracked. He didn't trust himself to go on. He stood there, cold and empty, waiting for the axe to fall. But it didn't. The sergeant gazed over at him for a long minute. He nodded his head slowly. Listen to me, cub, he said. I know what happened in the killing house. Alex glanced up. Wolf forgot about the CCTV. We've got it all on film. Then why? Alex began. Didn't you make a complaint against him, cub? No, sir. Do you want to make a complaint against him, cub? Of course, then. No, sir. Good. The sergeant pointed at the rock face, suggesting a path up with his finger. It's not as difficult as it looks, he said. And they're waiting for you at the top. You've got a nice cold dinner, survival rations. You don't want to miss that. Alex drew a deep breath and started forward as he passed the sergeant. He stumbled and put out a hand to steady himself, brushing against him. Sorry, sir, he said. It took him 20 minutes to reach the top, and sure enough, K-Unit was already there, crouching around 3 small tents that must have been pitched earlier in the afternoon. 2 for 2, men sharing. One, the smallest for Alex. Snake, a thin, fair-haired man who spoke with a Scottish accent, looked up at Alex. He had a tin of cold stew in one hand, a teaspoon in the other. I didn't think you'd make it, he said. Alex couldn't help noticing a certain warmth in the man's voice, and for the first time he hadn't called him 009. Nor did I, Alex said. Wolf was squatting over what he hoped would become a campfire, trying to get it started with 2 flints while Fox and Eagle watched. He was getting nowhere. The stones only produced the smallest of sparks, and the scraps of newspaper and leaves that he had collected were already far too wet. Wolf struck at the stones again and again. The others watched, their face glum. Alex held out the box of matches that he had pocketed from the sergeant when he had pretended to stumble at the foot of the rock face. These might help, he said. He threw the matches down, then went into his tent. Chapter 6. Toys aren't us. In the London office, Miss Jones sat waiting while Alan Blunt read the report. The sun was shining. A pigeon was strutting back and forth along the ledge outside as if keeping guard. You're doing very well, Blunt said. At last. Remarkably well, in fact. He turned a page. I see he missed the target practice. Were you planning to give him a gun? Miss Jones asked. No, I don't think that would be a good idea. Then why does he need a target practice? Blunt raised an eyebrow. We can't give a teenager a gun, he said. On the other hand, I don't think we can send him to Port Talon empty-handed. You'd better have a word with Smithers. I already have. He's working on it now. Miss Jones stood up as if to leave, but at the door she hesitated. I wonder if it's secured to you that Ryder may have been preparing him for this all along, she said. What do you mean? Preparing Alex to replace him. Ever since the boy was old enough to walk, he's been in training for intelligence work. Without knowing it, I mean, he's lived abroad. Now he speaks French, German and Spanish. He's been mountain climbing, diving and skiing. He's learned karate. Physically, he's in perfect shape. He shrugged. I think Ryder wanted Alex to become a spy. But not so soon, Blunt said. I agree. You know as well as I do, Alan, he's not ready yet. If we send him into Sale Enterprises, he's going to get himself killed. Perhaps. A single word, cold, matter of fact. He's 14 years old. We can't do it. We have to. Blunt stood up and opened the window, letting in the air and the sound of the sad traffic. The pigeon hurled itself off the ledge, afraid of him. This whole business worries me, he said. The Prime Minister sees the Stormbreakers as a major coup for himself and for his government, and for his government. But there's still something about Herald's sale that I don't like. Did you tell the boy about Yasin Gregorovich? No, Miss Jones shook her head. Then it's time you did. It was Yasin who killed his uncle. I'm sure of it. And if Yasin was working for sale, what will you do if Yasin kills Alex Ryder? That's not our problem, Miss Jones. If the boy gets himself killed, it will be the final proof that there is something wrong. At the very least, it will allow me to postpone the Stormbreaker project and take a good hard look at what's going on at Port Talon. In a way, it would almost help us if he was killed. The boy's not ready yet. He'll make mistakes. It won't take them long to find out who he is, Miss Jones sighed. I don't think Alex has got much chance at all. I agree. Blunt turned back from the window. The sun slanted over his shoulder. A single shadow fell across his face. But it's too late to worry about that now, he said. We have no more time. Stop the training. Send him. Alex sat hunched up in the back of the low-flying takeaway 130 military aircraft, his stomach churning. Behind his knees, there were 12 men sitting in 2 lines around him. His own unit and 2 others for an hour now. The plane had been flying as just 100 meters, following the Welsh valleys, dipping and swerving to avoid the mountain peaks, a single bulb glowing red behind a wire mesh and adding to the heat in the cramped cabin. Alice could feel the engines vibrating through him. It was like travelling in tumble dryer and microwave oven combined. The thought of jumping out of a plane with an oversized silk umbrella would have made Alex sick with fear. But only that morning he'd been told that he wouldn't in fact be jumping himself. A signal from London. They couldn't risk him breaking a leg, it said. And Alex guessed that the end of his training was near. Even though he'd been taught how to pack a parachute, how to control it, how to exit a plane, and how to land, at the end of the day, the sergeant had instructed him to join the flight for the experience. Now close to the drop zone, Alex felt almost disappointed. He'd watched everyone else jump, and then he'd been left alone. P-5. The voice of the pilot came over the speaker. Distant and metallic. Alex gritted his teeth. 5 minutes until jump. He looked at the other men shuffling it into position, checking the cords that connected them to the static line. He was sitting next to Wolf. To his surprise, the man was completely quiet, unmoving. It was hard to tell in the half-darkness, but the look on his face could almost have been fear. There was a loud buzz, and the red light turned green. The assistant pilot had climbed through from the cockpit. He reached for a handle and pulled open a door set in the back of the aircraft, allowing the cold air to rush in. Alex could see a single square of night. It was raining. The rain howled past. The green light began to flash. The assistant pilot tapped the first pair on their shoulders, and Alex watched them shuffle over to the side, and then throw themselves out. For a moment, they were there, frozen in the doorway. Then they were gone. like a photograph crumbled and spun away by the wind. 2 more men followed, then other 2, until only the final pair had still to jump. Alex glanced at Wolf, who seemed to be struggling with a piece of equipment. His partner was moving to the door without him, but still, Wolf didn't look up. The other man jumped. Suddenly, Alex was aware that only he and Wolf were left. "Move it!" the assistant pilot shouted above the roar of the engines. Wolf picked himself up. His eyes briefly met Alex's, and in that moment Alex knew Wolf was a popular leader. He was tough, and he was fast, completing a 40-kilometer hike as if it were just a stroll in the park. But he had a weak spot. Somehow he'd allowed this parachute jump to get to him, and he was too scared to move. It was hard to believe, but there he was, frozen in the doorway, his arm rigid, staring out. Alex glanced back. The assistant pilot was looking the other way. He hadn't seen what was happening, and when he did, if the Wolf failed to make the jump, it would be the end of his training and maybe even the end of his career. Even hesitating would be bad enough. He'd be binned. Alex thought for a moment. Wolf hadn't moved. Alex could see his shoulders rising and falling as if he tried to summon up the courage to go. 10 seconds had passed, maybe more. The assistant pilot was leaning down, stowing away a piece of equipment. Alex stood up. "Wolf," he said. Wolf didn't even hear him. Alex took one last quick look at the assistant pilot, and then kicked out with all his strength. His foot slammed into Wolf's backside. He'd put all the strength behind it. Wolf was caught by surprise, his hands coming free, as he plunged into the swirling night air. The assistant pilot turned round and saw Alex. What are you doing?" he shouted. "Just stretching my legs," Alex shouted back. The plane curved in the air and began the journey home. Miss Jones was waiting for him. That when he walked into the hangar, he was sitting at a table wearing a grey silk jacket and trousers with a black handkerchief flowing out of her top pocket. For a moment she didn't recognise him. Alex was dressed in a flying suit. His hair was damp from the rain. His face was pinched with tiredness, and he had seemed to have grown older very fast. None of the men had arrived back yet. A truck had been sent to collect them from a field about 3 kilometres away. "Alex," she said. Alex looked at her, but said nothing. It was my decision to stop you jumping," she said. I hope you're not disappointed. I just thought it would be too much of a risk. Please, sit down." Alex sat down opposite her. "I have something that might cheer you up," she went on. "I brought you some toys." "I'm too old for toys," Alex said. "Not these toys." She signaled and a man appeared, walking out of the shadows carrying a tray of equipment which he set down on the table. The man was enormously fat. When he sat down, the metal chair disappeared beneath the spread of his buttocks, and Alex was surprised that he could even take his weight. He was bald with a black moustache and several chins, each one melting into the next and finally into his neck and shoulders. He wore a pinstriped suit which must have used enough material to make a tent. "Smithers," he said, nodding at Alex. "Very nice to meet you, old chap." "What have you got for him?" Miss Jones demanded. "I'm afraid we haven't had a great deal of time, Miss J," Smithers replied. The challenge was to think what a 14-year-old might carry with him and adapt it. He picked the first object of the tray, a yo-yo. It was slightly larger than normal, made of plastic. "Let's start with this," Smithers said. Alex shook his head. He couldn't believe any of this. "Don't tell me," Alex said. "It's some sort of secret weapon?" Not exactly. I was told you weren't to have weapons. You're too young. So it's not really a hand grenade. Pull the string and run like hell? Certainly not. is a yo-yo. Smithers pulled the string, holding between podgy fingers and thumbs. However, the string is a special sort of nylon, very advanced. There are 30 meters of it, and it can lift weights of up to 100 kilograms. The actual yo-yo is motor-sized and clips onto your belt. Very useful for climbing. Amazing! Alex was unimpressed. And then there's this. Smithers produced a small tube. Alex read the sign. Zit clean for healthier skin. Nothing personal, Smithers went on apologetically, but we thought it was something a boy of your age might use. And it is rather remarkable. He opened the tube and squeezed some of the cream onto his finger. Completely harmless when you touch it, but bring it into contact with metal, and it's quite another story. He wiped his finger, smearing the cream onto the surface of the table. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a wisp of acrid smoke twisted upwards in the air. The metal sizzled, and a jagged hole appeared. It'll do that to just about any metal, Smithers explained. Very useful if you need to break through a lock. He took out a handkerchief and wiped his finger clean. Anything else? Miss Jones asked. Oh yes, Miss J. You could say this is our piece de resistance. He picked up a quite brightly coloured box that Alex recognised at once as a Nintendo DS. What teenager would compete without of one of these? He asked. This one comes with 4 games, and the beauty of it is each game turns the computer into something quite different. Here, he showed Alex the first game. If you insert Nemesis, the computer becomes a fax photocopier, which gives you direct contact with us. A vice versa. A second game, Exotic turns the computer into an X-ray device. It has an audio function too. The headphones are useful for eavesdropping. It's not as powerful as I'd like, but we're working on it. Speed Wars is a bug finder. I suggest you use it the moment you're shown it to your room. And finally, Bomber Boy. Do I get to play with that one? Alex asked. You can play with all 4 of them, but as the name might suggest, this is actually a smoke bomb. You leave the game cartridge somewhere in a room and press start 3 times on the console, and it will go off. Useful camouflage if you need to escape in a hurry. Thank you, Smithers, Miss Jones said. My pleasure, Miss J. Smithers stood up, his legs straining to take the huge weight. I'll hope to see you again, Alex. I've never had to equip a boy before, but I'm sure I'll be able to think up a whole host of quite delightful ideas. He waddled off and disappeared through a door which clanged shut behind him. Miss Jones turned to Alex. You leave tomorrow for Port Talent, she said. You'll be going under the name of Felix Lester. She handed him a whole folder. We've sent the real Felix Lester on holiday in Scotland. You'll find everything you need to know about him in here. I'll read it in bed. Good. Suddenly she was serious, and Alex found himself wondering if she herself was a mother. If so, she could well have a son of his age. She took out a black and white photograph and laid it on the table. It showed a man in a white t-shirt and jeans. He was in his late 20s with blonde, close-cropped hair, a smooth face, the body of a dancer. The photograph was slightly blurred. It had been taken from a distance, as if with a hidden camera. I want you to look at this, she said. His name was Yasin Gregorovich. He was born in Russia, but now he works for many countries. Iraq has employed him Also Serbia, Libya and China. What does he do? Alex asked, though looking at the cold face with its blank hooded eyes, he could almost guess. He's a contract killer, Alex. We believe he killed Iron Rider. There was a long pause. Alex stared at the photograph, trying to print it on his mind. The photograph was taken 6 months ago in Cuba. It may have been a coincidence, but Herod Sale was there at the same time. The two of them might have met, and there was something else. She paused. Why did they use a code in the last message? A signal letter? Why? Why for Yassen? He must have seen Yassen somewhere in Port Talon. He wanted us to know. Why are you telling me this now? Alex asked. Because if you see him, if Yassen is anywhere near Sale Enterprises, I want you to contact us at once. And then we'll pull you out. If Yassen finds out you're working for us, he'll kill you too. Alex smiled. I'm too young to interest in him, he said. No, Miss Jones took the photograph back. Just remember, Alex, you're never too young to die. Alex stood up. You'll leave tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, Miss Jones said. Be careful, Alex, and good luck. Alex walked across the hangar, his footsteps echoing. Behind him, Miss Jones unwrapped a peppermint and slipped it into her mouth. Her breath always smelt faintly of mint. As head of special operations, how many men had she sent to their deaths? Iron Rider, maybe a dozen, maybe dozens more. Perhaps it was easier for her if her breath was sweet. There was a movement ahead of him, and he saw that the parachutists had got back from their jump. They were walking towards him out of the darkness with Wolf and the other men from K Unit right at the front. Alex tried to step round them, but he found Wolf blocking his way. You're leaving, Wolf said. Somehow he must have heard that Alex's training was over. Yes. There was a long pause. What happened on the plane? He began. Forget it, Wolf, Alex said. Nothing happened. You jumped and I didn't. That's all. Wolf held out a hand. I want to know. I was wrong about you. I'm sorry I gave you such a hard time, but you're all right. And maybe one day it would be good to work with you. You'll never know, Alex said. They shook. Good luck, Cub. Goodbye, Wolf.